All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Kate, and I'm part of the marketing team at AVAP. Here to welcome you. We have a great session for you today, led by two of our change management experts, David and Noelle, on conducting business in the new normal and how to navigate the future of work. So what do we mean by that? The future of work describes the changes in how work will get done over the next decade, influenced by technological, generational, and societal shifts. What we're seeing is being called the fourth industrial revolution, which is this rapid change to technology, industries, and society through, which is brought about by all of the interconnectivity and automation that we're seeing affecting not only organizations, but us as individuals as well. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. Recording will be sent out to you after the session. Look for that email in the next 24 to 48 hours. And feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A throughout the session if you have any questions, concerns, or thoughts. And then towards the end, we are going to have an open discussion. So we will give you the ability to come off mute at that time and encourage you to come off mute and share your experiences with us so we can have an open discussion there. Quick AVAP plug for those of you who might not know who we are, and maybe a little refresher for those that do. We have, since 2006, AVAP has been helping organizations transform their operations and meet their business goals. We continue to experience tremendous growth and are fortunate to have over 200 customers in government, education, nonprofit, and healthcare. We have more than 275 exceptional business and technical consultants, data strategists, and change management professionals that have chosen to build their career with us here at AVAP, offering our clients the most experienced pool of certified consultants in the industries that we serve. AVAP has won over 100 industry awards for partnerships, services, innovations, culture, and growth. And our mission is to successfully partner with our customers in their pursuit of digital transformation and be able to deliver outcomes-based services to support your business goals. To just quickly go over our services, all of this kind of starts with management consulting. Our management consulting experts can help you lay the foundation for success by eliminating a lot of those front-end obstacles that you might run into. AVAP offers a full suite of advisory services, including system selection, process excellence, and organizational change management. Our data and analytics practice helps organizations get the most value from their data in real time and can set leadership up to make decisions faster and with more confidence. AVAP is one of the fastest growing Workday service partners. Our consultants can help your organization get the most out of your Workday investment, from implementation through go live and training to optimization and application managed services. And finally, our change management practice is market leading and powered by research, data, and proven practices personalized for your business. Our change management experts help organizations work through change and connect people with results. With that, I'm going to pass it over to David and Noelle to introduce themselves.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Noelle Akins, and I'm a senior consultant with AVAP. I've been with the team for about 7 years, helping leaders maintain their true north while moving their people through a world of change. And I'm here with David Herringhouse. David?
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you as well, Kate. My name is David Herringhouse. Been part of AVAP for the last 6 years. I am part of the organizational change management function, but I also get involved in organizational effectiveness solutions for org development and design, leadership development, and a gamut of other types of services that I get myself involved with here for the many clients that we have. So we're going to start you off today here. And first of all, I'd like to welcome you here to the session, but just to get some interaction going right now, we've got a chat question up. And if you could take the opportunity to put in the chat some of the things that, if you think about the changes that have occurred in your field, the industry, or the organizations that you support, what are you the most excited about? And also, what are you the most concerned about here as we gone through the last couple of years of the pandemic and different types of change that have occurred. And I'm seeing that there's some chats coming through, the flexibility that's coming in, or the flexibility that's involved. And we think about that, and seeing that we're excited, we're all working differently here as well. Okay. Any others?
David, I've heard a lot about creative collaboration options.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot more creativity
Mm-hmm.
and increased tech platforms.
Yeah.
That could be a plus. It could also be a concern. Patty said she's concerned with how we engage and keep a pulse remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that certainly is a challenge that I have seen personally, and I know that Noelle has also some of the clients that we support also. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I'm going to throw it back to Noelle. Noelle's going to go over today's agenda for us.
Yeah, so now that we've had a minute to think about the future of work, this is our agenda. First, we're going to take a look at where are we and how in the world did we get here? So what's our current state? That's what every good consultant does. We start with a look at current state. Then we're going to take a look at some of the trends, the themes, and the implications for companies in this new world. And then we'll finish by looking at how we can prepare for what is next. What kind of skill sets, what kind of mindsets are needed as we move into the future state? I think David mentioned this already, but we would like for this to be very interactive. So feel free to use the chat, jump in with your thoughts and your perspectives. We'll be taking a look at that as we go. David, kick us off. Tell us a little bit more about where we are now.
Thanks, Noelle. So where are we? You know, as we look at ourselves from a leadership perspective, we always want to kind of assess where we're at this point. We've come out of a couple of years of significant change, so much so that in the year 2020, the word of the year was unprecedented. And we've heard that word a lot in a number of different ways, but we certainly have gone through significant change. But we want to kind of ground ourselves in what took place prior to pandemic or prior to 2020 as well. So we think about some of the things that were already in progress here. Things like robotics and AI. Robotics, certainly, and AI are certainly now even more in the news. We've seen significant change that have been coming up. We've seen the growth of the gig economy, but a gig economy existed prior to the pandemic as well. There used to be a different term for gig back before the 21st century here, but now we're talking about specifically having some type of part-time function in addition to maybe your full-time role or combining several different gigs. We think about the globalization of the economy. We think about how much we interact and how changes in one part of the world have an impact on us. That has been the case, and it will continue to be the case. Offshoring, specifically moving functions or departments or organizations from country A to country B existed before. Many of these types of situations were as a result of talent acquisition choices or the scarcity of resources, but we still see these things continue to be the case. And finally, gender and race inequities existed prior to, and they still exist now that we are, here in April of 2023. So let's go ahead and move on. Now let's think about what has changed. When I think back about, what changed for me the most is that, the conditions of my work, they were not set in stone. So for many of us, and I think about the date March 16th, 2020, and I think that that's when many of us were impacted. I remember I was on a project, and then we went from working in an office to working remotely. Now, we had some experience in working remotely, but this was going to be on a full-time basis. And this was a big change for everybody. And amazingly, we were all able to get through that appropriately here. And the world didn't stop. We just started working from home. So we really learned that the conditions of our work can be transformed. Secondly, we looked at really how much we depend on essential workers. I think when we think about essential workers, each of us had in our mind healthcare professionals, police, and firefighters and such as workers. But our definition of essential workers really expanded into maybe grocery workers, delivery people, people who worked in retail establishment. Well, okay. And now we think about how many people work in the gig economy here. One of the latest stats is that there are 57 million workers in the gig economy. So we think about places like Uber and Lyft and Grubhub, kind of straightforward, but we also think about organizations like Taskmaster, Fiverr, Upwork, and we see their commercials on TV constantly. That this is really the way in which things are changing. We think about also that approximately, or more than 1/3 of American workers have some type of gig work arrangement as part of their primary or secondary job. And that is a significant change as to what's taken place just within the last 3 to 5 years. We'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. One of the things that impacts all leaders is this, it's really talent acquisition. And if I think back, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was the statement or the book. It was based on a study called The War for Talent, originally a McKinsey study, then became a book in 2001 from Harvard Business Press. And the premise of this is that there was always going to be a war for talent. Back when the book was published in 2001, it talked about this stretching out for 2 decades. This was right in alignment with the dot-com era. But we know that as we've even gotten through the dot-com and now we're moving toward present times, that the war for talent remains just as fierce and robust as it was back in the late 1990s and in the early 2000s. One example of that is how we go about looking for work. LinkedIn is one of the places that many of us search on a regular basis. Job postings on LinkedIn before the pandemic, 1% of all the job postings that were listed on LinkedIn were for remote work. As of right now, here in 2023, it's 14% of all the jobs that are posted on LinkedIn are specifically remote. Now that's exponential growth in and of itself. But when you consider that when you look at who applies for these roles, more than 50% and more than half of the people of all job applications on LinkedIn go to that 14% of the jobs that are listed as remote. Talent acquisition people and hiring leaders can tell you specifically that the toughest jobs to fill are those that are full-time at an office. Now, we all know that many of our organizations, our companies, and the clients that we support have gone to some type of hybrid work environment. But we know that this is just a significant change, and as we are adapting and adjusting to that, the changes are robust and they will continue to happen going forward here. I'm going to switch it over to and have Noelle talk a little bit about some of the organizational impacts here for the future of work.
Thank you, David. Yeah, let's look at what this means to our organizations. First of all, moving into COVID, most organizations were not prepared or positioned to really adapt quickly to that kind of volume of sustained change. It was a place that we had never been before, right? And we had a very reactive approach collectively to this disruption. And we know that a reactive approach is obviously it's not sustainable. So now we're emerging from the sense of being reactive and just kind of surviving to becoming much more intentional. Out of all this disruptive change, we have learned a new way and a different way of working, like Patty said earlier in the chat. We are now becoming more collaborative, more innovative, we're more agile and flexible. So past 2 years, they were years of unplanned reinvention. But now Korn Ferry would say this is where it gets intentional because change and continued change is now expected. So a huge part of that continued change that we're expecting is how and where work is being done. So let's shift to the next slide and take a look at some of our workspaces. We've got more and more hybrid workspace, as David was mentioning. And what that means is that some of our work is on site, some of it is fully remote, but most of it is a blend. And executives are noting that they have a lot of concern about erosion of corporate culture, and that being one of the biggest challenges. 33% or 36% rather said that that is a big concern for them. So what we're finding is that there's a normalization of this hybrid approach to where we work. And we found that a sustainable future of work is not, we're working from 9 to 5 right here. That's probably not the way the future is going to look. But we also know that it can't be, I'm going to work anytime, anywhere, because working anytime, all the time is not going to work either. So we as an organizations are in this messy middle of recreating what that looks like. We do know, though, that as companies figure this out, those that are more inflexible with their return to work policies, those that don't have a lot of scheduling flexibility are definitely getting hammered in their employee experience scores. And that is from a wonderful organization. If you're interested in knowing trends for the future, I really want to share this resource for you. And it is called Future Forum. So check them out. The thing that I want to make a note of here as well, related to hybrid work experiences, is that there's also concern about this loss of mentoring. And there was a concern around a loss of innovation opportunities, because we need that for that collaborative, sense of creativity. Somebody said in the chat that they feel a concern with not really knowing what's going on with your workers. And there was an analogy years ago about, am I on the dance floor or am I in the balcony? And the dance floor is where the work is being done. The balcony is where leaders can take a high-level view of the bigger picture. So leaders with more remote teams feel that they continue to be in the balcony, and they fear what's missing going on in the dance floor. They're afraid they don't have their finger on the pulse of the organization. So I think a lot of us can relate to this. I'd like for us to take a look, though, at how this change landscape is hitting us as individuals. So next slide, please. Thank you. I'll give you a moment just to take these statistics in, because they tell an important story that points to the Great Resignation. The numbers here related to burnout continue to grow. As a matter of fact, I mentioned Future Forum. One of the studies that they recently did back in 2022, October, late fall, for the C-suite, specifically for C-suite members, executives are showing overall satisfaction scores that have dropped by 15%, with reports of 20% worse work-life balance and 40% more work-related stress and anxiety. So individually, we are struggling at a greater degree. The good news is two things. Organizations have seen this, and we're going to talk more about this. Organizations are now prioritizing more mental health and wellness activities. So that's one very good thing. The second thing is that leadership really matters. On the right side of the slide, you see that employees whose leaders have not adapted to change personally are much more likely to have hard times with depression and emotional exhaustion. The better leaders are at adapting to change, the better experience their employees can also have. And these leaders impact how their team members experience that change. So the sustained changes at both organizational and individual levels make for a very different kind of change curve. Most of us, thank you, new slide here. Most of us are familiar with this change curve and its impact on engagement. It impacts morale and productivity. And there's really 4 big steps through the process. The first one is denial. We're comfortable with our current state. Even if it's not perfect, we know how to cope with it. When we find out about a change, we may move into resistance. Oftentimes, people are concerned about the change. There's shock, there's anger, there's pushback. We stay there. As we hear more, though, we begin to become more open and we move into that stage of exploration. The change is coming, we know, so let's learn about it. Let's become open and curious. And then that moves us into eventually the stage of acceptance, where we're willing to adopt. We're ready to embrace the stage. So, or change rather, ready to embrace the change. So this change curve has been around for a long time. What's different now, though, is it is 3D now. It is perpetual. It is happening all the time. The pace of change just continues to increase. It's pervasive. So everywhere you look, right, there's change everywhere. And it's exponential, which means that the impacts and the implications of that change ripple across other areas. As we continue to anticipate this 3D change experience, David's going to talk with us about some of the trends that we can see for the future.
Think about now themes, trends, and implications. So let's move to the next page. We've got 4 listed here. So Noelle and I will kind of jointly go through the 4 themes for the future. And we're thinking about these are the trends that are going to have the biggest impact on our work culture and how we as leaders and individuals who work within organizations manage that change. Noelle's going to go over the first 2, normalizing change constancy and integrating the work of people and machines. So let me throw it over to Noelle to go through those first 2.
Yeah, thank you, David. So the first one is normalizing change constancy, right? We're just going to expect change as a normal part of our life, and we're seeing a shift toward that. It is definitely a new mindset that change is normal. It's a part of everything we do. And by normalizing this change constancy, we can better prepare for, we can plan, we can manage, and even embrace change more quickly. So we're going to do a deeper dive on that topic. Let's take a look very briefly, though, at the second one, which is very important. It's integrating the work of people and machines. This theme for the future is about how work can be reconfigured in order to achieve the optimal integration between talent and machines. So when we think about this, think AI, think automation, and think about even as simple as the impact of adding new collaboration technologies to your team's repertoire. We need to understand how our organizations are using these new tools for communication, for culture building. There's a quote, this is an oldie but a goodie. Neil Postman wrote Technopoly, and one of my favorite quotes from that book, a new technology does not add or subtract something. It actually changes everything. So an example of this that's very timely is ChatGPT, right? That's an AI platform that it just recently came out. It's been around, but recently came out, and it is something that can speed research, analysis, create plans, create work products, right? And more. So the question is, how are we going to use this as individuals? How does our organization want us to use it? Company policies and ethics, they're having a hard time keeping up with the pace of these kinds of technological advances. But it's really important. So the integration of our work and machine work also creates new considerations related to power dynamics. And by that, I mean, it is important for us to fund and invest in improvements to technology and machines that benefit the organizations. We also are at the same time needing to invest in and meeting physical and emotional needs of the employees. So more on that later. David, you want to take on the cultivating organizational culture?
Thank you, Noelle. Just a high-level overview of these initially. Noelle and I are both change management professionals, and I know that there's many change management folks who are on the call with us today. But even as leaders, basic and simple changes that take place in the organization, each of us understands the importance that culture has on the overall success of a change initiative here, whether we are in charge of it, somebody else is, or whether we feel like it's being done to us. The culture of an organization really has a lot to do with dictating the success or perhaps the lack thereof of the specific change management initiative. We're seeing cultural changes within organizations, and in some cases erosion, due to the transient nature of many employees and the impact of remote work. It's not to say that culture is becoming better or worse. There are differences that have taken place now that we've adapted to our different working situations. The final theme that we're going to give a high-level overview here initially is fostering personal well-being. It's no longer just thinking about our mental and physical well-being, but considering all of our psychological safety, empathy, resilience, and overall physical safety. Nurturing and fostering personal well-being, our own personal and individual well-being, especially through work-life balance, is going to continue to be important, and even more so as we work toward the future. We're going to get more involved, Noelle and I, in normalizing change constancy and cultivating organizational culture here on the next few slides here. Let's move to the next one.
All right, I'll take this one. Normalizing change constancy, one of my favorite topics. The first point is organizations are really reinventing themselves and their activities. They are open to making changes in every part of their business. So it's not just the changes related to customers and suppliers and employees, but literally, how is the organization structured? Organizations are rethinking tools and resources that are needed for everyday business functions. So when I say open to making changes, what exactly does that mean? Being open? Well, it means that they're looking for unconventional applications. And that's what we need to do as we prepare to be a meaningful contributor. We want to be thinking about unconventional applications as well. It means that we become agile. We're on the lookout for trends and ways to adapt to these. There are a couple organizations who research trends, and we wanted to share that with you as well. If you want to check out their website just to get a sense of what they're grappling with, it will help kind of prime your thinking. Have you heard of IDEO? Or if you're familiar with futurist.org, and already I've mentioned the Future Forum. So those are three really good ones. A great example of one organization that we're working with is as they rethink how they perform everyday activities is one of our clients. It's a $40 million multi-brand organization, and they're launching this Ways of Working initiative that helps them reimagine their workplace. They're looking at things like, where do employees work? How do employees work? What kinds of tools are things like printers needed? Are bricks and mortar at all needed, etc. The other thing, as we set ourselves up to normalize change constancy, we're thinking about how organizations are structured. They're becoming more based on capability, organized by capability, and less hierarchical, more project-based. So we're seeing an environment that has people with individual skills that can collectively provide the competencies that the organization needs to complete the work effectively. But that person 1 year might be in, Department A, they get moved over to, it's not even a department, it's just a different project, or they're just more flexible. It's a flatter organization that are more project-based, moving employees based on what the capabilities are, less about job titles and organization like departmental structures. So many of us are seeing this as we consult with companies in our current projects. The last one is a really important one, and it's near and dear to my heart as a change and a training consultant. Organizations are rethinking how they approach change and learning. because if they want to remain relevant, if they want to remain healthy, we've got to learn, and we've got to learn quickly. So it's, everybody knows when we approach change, it's important to understand the reason for change, right? And craft a clear vision. All of that's still important, but what's very important now also is to approach change with agility. Allow for adjustments very quickly. It means that some of our change management approaches are going to be less formal and more right-sized. So those formal change initiatives are becoming smaller. They're becoming more targeted, showing agility to changing environments. And going forward, another point here is we do expect more training within organizations, that will increase as an internal function. And with that, as employees, as individuals, we must have learning agility. That's going to be a crucial quality for our people. All right, David, you're going to tell us more about what this means for the culture of our organizations, right?
That's right. Yeah, we can move forward. So we're talking about cultivating organizational culture. And Noel mentioned some of these things already here. The reality is that we were challenged even before hybrid work to help employees operate in a way that was aligned with the desired culture. Let's think about the culture before the pandemic. 70% of leaders were confident that they knew the culture their organization needed to drive business performance. But still, only 30% of those leaders were confident that the actual culture that they had was evident within their individual organizations. Leaders felt like they could articulate what they wanted the culture to be, but they weren't confident about creating an environment that reflected the actual desired state. Now, it's all well and good to say an organization values innovation, collaboration, and trust. But for example, then you must ask, do we demonstrate? Do our behaviors, innovation, collaboration, and trust in how we behave and how we treat each other? The reality is that there were problems with organizational culture before the pandemic, and there are now as well, in terms of workforce awareness, in terms of the belief in the culture, and ensuring that employees are consistently behaving in ways that are aligned to the overall desired culture. The culture after the move to remote and more hybrid work. Now, despite fears that remote work and hybrid work were going to dilute the overall organizational culture, most employees see the large-scale shift to flexible work as a net positive for the culture of their organization. In fact, 76% of newly remote and hybrid employees report a positive perception of the use of the word workplace. I get into many discussions with leaders about this, and there were the initial arguments about, if I can't see what they're doing, then I don't know what they're doing. But when you look at it from an overall employee perspective, and even one of the messages in the initial chat at the beginning of the session was talking about the flexibility. Employees have placed an extreme value on the overall flexibility that they are afforded within the working situation. 64% of hybrid and 66% of remote employees say that their organization's culture has a positive impact on their job, compared to just 50% of on-site employees. This takes work to accomplish. Organizational culture needs to be strong enough to really attract and retain top talent and drive performance and meet business objectives. It's also important that we understand how the new environment in which we are operating in, both virtual and from home, in which we are spending more time, influences how we behave. Now, less than 20% of employees say that they work in an environment that's marked by a high level of fairness, or that their experience is characterized by fairness. This type of red flag signals danger ahead for organizations that want to attract and retain talent, and remind us that it's very important to hardwire equity and that sense of fairness into our behaviors moving forward. Over 2/3 of executive teams are reevaluating their company's culture to reflect what is designed or what is defined as the new normal of virtual and hybrid work. You must consider your business strategy and identify the 2 or 3 things you need to drive success. There isn't a single right or wrong culture, but there are things that leaders must demand so far as how their teams work together that will drive their overall business success. The trick to operationalizing culture is making employees feel connected to it, whether they are in a distributed environment or they're co-located. Some leaders may believe that the physical workplace is the key driver of the future culture connectedness, but the environment is not the driver of culture. The ways in which we behave and work together are. We do, however, need to deliberately activate culture. We can't just tell people to behave in a certain way. For example, using what we might have described as old tangible artifacts, like posting the values of the organization on your wall. These things do not work now. We need to progress to the how of translating culture into what people do every day. Organizations that get this right understand the new drivers of culture and how the culture is operationalized into their environments, in which these individuals and their employees spend the most amount of time. They will embed culture into the new ways of working to help employees understand, believe, and live the desired culture in a hybrid or a remote work environment. And we're going to move forward, and Noel's going to discuss the ways in which we can kind of prepare for what's next here, for both an emerging skill sets and an emerging mindset here. So I'm going to shoot it back over to Noel.
Thanks, David. And we can move on to the next slide. The good news is that within all of this change, which is not slowing down, there are some specific things that we can, as individuals and as organizations, develop, some specific skill sets and some mindsets that are going to be crucial in this new world of work. So I'll take on, we'll start first with the skill sets part. Empathy is really important, and it's not just a mindset. It is something that we do. It is something that we practice. So what is empathy and why is it important? Empathy is being understanding of others' personal and professional situations, right? So it's really being able to understand in the way that they need to be understood. So as David mentioned earlier, flexibility is really the key to employee satisfaction. At the end of the day, given the talent shortage, the talent/power differential has definitely shifted, and it's no longer as a manager can I manage kind of autocratically, or not that that was ever a good way, but it's just not the way that we're going to be successful with our people now. It's very important as we're wanting to develop inclusion and connectedness to have that sense of understanding. So what does that mean for us? It means we need to think differently about, like we've said, how, when, and where we allow people to work. Watch out for location bias. Those who are on site are more visible. So are we treating them differently if we're managers? Continue to foster your emotional intelligence. That's going to be very, very important. And that's an important skill even in the digital arena. There's this delay in technology, and sometimes when we're presenting or we're sharing something in a Teams meeting, we can maybe step on each other's toes because we don't wait that extra second or two for something to buffer. So it impacts everything, how we communicate, when we communicate, etc. Second point, a skill set that's very important is that digital adoption, because technology platforms will continue to change. We have to continue to expand our tech savvy, even while practicing healthy digital citizenship. And what I mean by that is that as we consume and deploy new tools, sometimes those old ones aren't rolled off. It's very rare actually that they are rolled off. So that means we're just adding one more communication possibility to our repertoire. So we need to use the old without getting sloppy while we're also using the new. Remain agile and very simple in your approach as much as possible. Build on what works. So I've worked with one company where text blasts was a great way to communicate key information. Very simple too. So if that works, use it. Do you have an organizational social media platform? We use Yammer. At AVAP, we use Yammer, and so there's all these different groups, and we're very connected in that way, and we can share what's going on. So digital adoption, super important. Next one is leadership agility. We talked about agility already a little bit, but what is it? It's vision with flexibility. So I recently came off of a project with an R&D organization, and it was an amazing opportunity to see this kind of agility, a very agile approach to both their project management and their change management. And when something wasn't working well, they immediately were able to scrum around what that issue is. And they set up successive scrums until things were back on track. It was really phenomenal to be a part of that. Also related to leadership agility, we are seeing a shift from an executive leadership approach to more of an enterprise leadership approach. And the distinctive there is that the enterprise leadership approach is less siloed. It's much more collaborative. It's connected across departments and divisions. We're realizing that we need a picture of the whole and we need to collaborate. Lastly, OD design, OD work. As we rethink the entire organization, we need to think about what structures within the organization and what strategies are needed. So what departments, and then also what are the undergirding policies that are required in order for our organizations to achieve our purpose. This is definitely, the skill set itself is a growing trend. AVAP is actually partnering with clients at increased levels right now on org design, and Accenture, you may have heard, they recently purchased expertise from a university for org design. So an understanding, we all need to have an understanding of when these skill sets and these frameworks are needed so that we can pull them out or pull the right people in when they are required. In addition to skill sets, there are some mindsets that are very important. And David, he's going to share that.
Thanks, Noelle. So the first one there, embracing ambiguity. From an overall leadership perspective, I understand from a mental perspective, this is always a difficult one for people to feel comfortable with. You're a leader, you're supposed to know the answers, but now you know as well as I do, we're not always certain what's going to be happening tomorrow or next week or what the future holds for us. But really trying to make sure that we as individuals can embrace ambiguous types of situations. It's not to say that we're not going to follow up and find out the answer. It's not to say that you don't do the research on your end to try to make calculated guesses on these types of things. But overall, just making sure as an individual that you are embracing the concept of ambiguity. The second one is curiosity and learning agility. I know I've talked to many individuals and they talk about how they're lifelong learners, and you want to see it in action sometimes. Just being curious about what's the latest technology, what's the different ways in which people are communicating with each other, what's the best way to interact with your employees, and how can you become more agile in learning and how to do these types of things. The same consistent practices and behaviors that we've had as leaders for many years, the fundamental concepts are correct, but we may need to adapt it to some extent. I remember a quick story. I was in an HR role about 15 years ago, probably dating myself, But I told my son, who was, a teenager at the time, he needed to go out and find a job for the summer. And I expected he was going to go out from place to place and fill out applications. And I knew, later on, and you shouldn't say, this was not 15 years ago, within the last 5 years or so, I was connected to him on Snapchat, and he sent out a real quick Snapchat, and it said, please HMU if you know of anybody hiring. And I did not know what that meant, but it simply meant, please hit me up if you know of anybody that was hiring. And I was stunned, number one, when I saw this Snapchat come through. But number two, I was pleasantly surprised that by the time I had gotten home from that day, that he'd already gained employment here. So my old ways of thinking this was the best way to find a role were not the ways in which they actually take place. It was modern day networking, in its prime.
Yeah.
We think about a connection to purpose and well-being. What is our purpose? What is our own personal why? And why are we connected to the organization? What does our organization do? And how does this appeal to our specific why? And how do we marry those two particular items as well? Okay. All of these things require greater intentionality on our part from a mental perspective. And then finally, we look at work-life blend for well-being. A couple of things. We know that when we started working from home, maybe those lines kind of got blurred about when am I actually on the clock, or when can I not be reached? I think that many of us had trouble turning off many times. You might have felt like you were available all the time. And that was a very difficult kind of mindset for us to get used to. Many of us have adapted, not everybody, but it is one of those things where you may feel like you're constantly on. Really coming up and determining specific boundaries for yourself is a very, very important aspect of this. And about 1/3 of workers believe that mental health benefits are more important than higher pay or salary. And about 60% of employees claim that a healthy work-life balance is more important than financial compensation. These are stats from SHRM that have come out here recently as well. Okay. So that really kind of talks a little bit more about the skill sets and the overall mindsets that we have, and how we can prepare our own individual way and from our ways as leaders within organizations. We're going to go ahead and open up the microphones now. I'm going to throw it over to Kate as to how that's going to work here.
Thanks, David. Yeah, really quick before we start the discussion, we're going to go ahead and change the settings so that you can unmute yourself. You're probably going to get a notification that will say unmute or stay muted. Whatever you decide to do right this second with those options won't matter. After that, you'll still have the ability to now come off mute and join the discussion, and we would love for you to do so. So to kick it off, just start kind of thinking about your role and how your work is changing personally. What does your environment of change look like as an employee? And again, feel free to come off mute and give some of your experience. Any common themes or challenges you're seeing?
Are you seeing anything specific to your work culture that has shifted? So not just the where you work, but the connectedness, the messaging from your leaders around the culture. How has that changed, or what does that look like for you now?
Yeah, I'll jump in here with just an example. Some of the things I've seen in one of the clients that I'm supporting, it's a large customer contact center, or a call center, where I think everybody was used to kind of being there in that office together. You could hear the action going on in there. And those individuals have been remote for the last couple of years. So there's different ways in which they are trying to make sure that they are connecting with their employees. I've seen them introduce Yammer, now I think called Viva Engage, with their individuals. It's easier for them to interact. They're scheduling time off of the phone for more interaction virtually as well. Not, like a virtual happy hour that would take place after hours, but some of these types of things during the day, just to make sure that the employees feel like the leaders are listening to them and that they can interact in a more free environment with some of the people with whom they're used to sitting next to, or who they have been used to sitting next to for a long period of time. And then many of these individuals have been hired when it's always been virtual as well. So it gives them some sense of connectedness with each other also.
That's a great example, David. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so the second question, how are you supporting the changes in culture in your environment? I know you kind of spoke to that a little bit, David, but does anyone want to share about how you're supporting change? And David and Noelle, I don't know if you have some.
I have some ideas about that. I think the desire for connectedness is so important with the organization, with leaders, and with the people that we're working with. And so I have seen some things that are a little different. First of all, I think it's very important for organizations to really scale up the EQ and change leadership skills for people managers, because they have the most influence on the satisfaction of their direct reports. So that is very, very important. It's so important that AVAP has recently kicked off a new Change Academy to teach people how to move through change and how to lead others through change. So very, very important there. But other things that people have done that I've seen is greater sense of transparency in meetings. I've seen leaders, senior leaders, own their own misses. Like if they've made a mistake and they've just misstepped, just having that very candid conversation at a very broad level, not just in a boardroom, but at a very broad level. Hey, this was a miss. They're very open and honest. I've also seen those leaders clarify or communicate about the goals with as much clarity as they possibly could. But with this kind of shift now, it's very hard to say things unequivocally, so I've seen people say, here's what we do know. Here's what we don't know. Here's when we might know more. So that's been very helpful. And then I think our organization is a great example of this, just an increased committee involvement, participation, an ability to participate in influencing the culture. So through committees like Women in Leadership, our DE&I committee, capability groups, etc. And then pulse surveys. That's a great tool. You can use a special tool or technology for that, but I see organizations using, they could use Google Forms for that, but just getting things out really quick to get a quick, 3 quick questions, and then getting the information back and sharing it out or using it, acting on it quickly. So it's not hung up in a long process. Those pulse surveys are real important.
Yeah. I think about that as well, Noelle. I was going to mention the surveys. I have seen with some of the organizations that I support an increased level of surveying that's taken place. Not 20, 30 minutes worth of surveys, but really trying to get at those items that really impact the employees directly here and that speak directly to the culture or the level of employee engagement. Because, really, the bottom line about why we look at engagements, really, we're trying to make sure that people stick around with us longer and that they're more productive while they're working for an organization. But we have, certainly companies have had difficulty still kind of just attracting and developing that talent as well. So we're trying to start at the base. So I've seen organizations trying to look at every aspect of that, trying to look at how they can attract and develop individuals for, but once they are there, how can they keep these individuals engaged? And how can they help prepare themselves for, when we talk about the future of work?
Awesome. There was one question in the chat. How has the most recent economic uncertainty had an impact on anything that you two have discussed today?
So I'd say with the recent, we'll not use the term recession, there has been a fluctuation in the economic conditions. I think that when I talked to some executives here in the last year, when they were in anticipation of a slowdown, I think their thought was that might shift the balance of power back to the organization, where they could be more, I'd say, this dictatorial about trying to get people to come back into the office. I don't anticipate, and I'm not an economic individual, but I do not anticipate us going into recession. But I still think that no matter what, we see fluctuations in what's taking place in the economy. That makes it even more important for us to identify ways to attract and develop the talent, to make them want to come and work for our organization. It's not time to turn that around. We as an organization, I think, have an obligation to try to make work as stimulating and to make the environments in which our people operate as comfortable and productive as possible. And I'll throw it back to you, Noel, if you have any comments.
Yeah, no, I think that's great.
Okay, I don't think there's any other questions. I'll throw it back to you two real quick to go over the next slide.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, well, we wanted to provide you with some links for additional reading. These are some of the resources that David and I have used in preparing for this content, and others are just great things to know about. So definitely check that out. And then we have, I think the next slide is, yeah, just a look at some of our services. Do you want to speak to that, David?
I can actually take that. So after talking through all the change that we experienced today, we just thought it would be nice to touch on some of the ways that we can actually help you build your change capability, whether that's at the individual level or the organizational level. Up on the screen, you just can see an overview of our change management services, which include project-led change management, enterprise change management, organization effectiveness solutions, change management for Workday, change analytics, and of course, our very own AVAP Change Academy that Noel mentioned. The Change Academy offers change workshops dedicated to building the knowledge, skills, and ability in organizational change. The curriculum tries to meet participants where they are by leveraging best practices, trending topics, all while delivering exceptional value through experiential learning to help you navigate your change journey. So just want to thank everybody again for joining, spending time with us today. I hope you can take back some of these items to your organization and start to implement them. If you have any questions, Noel and David can be reached with their contact information on the screen. After the session, you will get a recording, so you'll be able to see all those slides, all those wonderful resources that we shared. And then when we do close out today, you'll be prompted to take a short survey. Would really appreciate if you can fill that out, not only to tell us how we did today, but how we can have better sessions in the future and speak to things that are relevant and that are helpful to you. So again, thank you and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.
Thanks all. Great being with you.